And now we will begin the Food, Land, Water session. By 2030, the deadline for the Global Goals Agenda, we will need to feed almost 1 billion more people. How can we do that without overwhelming the planet? US scientist Jonathan Foley writes about a 5-step plan, including freezing our agriculture's footprint, growing more on farms we've got, using resources more efficiently, shifting diets, and reducing waste. We are at a pivotal moment, and we need research-intensive universities to make progress on these various steps. Today, it's my pleasure to introduce some of our finest researchers to speak about food, land, and water security and sovereignty. There will be 3 presentations in this session, followed by a 10 to 15-minute Q&A. During each presentation, the chat will be turned off. It will be turned on during the Q&A period for questions and discussion. During this Q&A, the chat function will be open to everyone. So please put your questions in the chat and select everyone as the recipient in the drop-down menu. All conference participants will see your questions or comments, and besides posing your comments and your questions, I encourage you to share your thoughts or comments about the presentation in the sessions. So at this point, I would like to introduce our first speaker. And Mr. Visscher, perhaps you could share your slides at this point. Our first presentation explores the enabling of sustainable development in Bangladesh through bilateral collaboration and partnership. Our presenter, Mr. Stephen Visscher, is the Director of Strategic Partnerships and Chief Operating Officer at the University of Saskatchewan's Global Institute for Food Security. His career in research policy and funding has forged innovative partnerships at national and international levels and has strengthened the involvement of science in diplomacy. He was recognized in the Queen's Honours in 2013 for his contributions to supporting UK research, and now we're fortunate that he joined the Global Institute of Food Security in 2018. Welcome to PAW, Mr. Visscher.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and hello to you all wherever you are in the world. Okay, well, thank you very much for the kind introduction, and it's a real pleasure to be able to talk about an initiative that we at the Global Institute for Food Security have been leading with Bangladesh, but working very much in partnership with our neighbours and colleagues on the Saskatchewan campus here and the surrounding ecosystem. What I'd like to do, just to give you a little bit of context, is to say why GIFS is involved in this. And first of all, GIFS is a relatively new institution. It was established in 2012 as a public-private partnership between Nutrien, the agricultural inputs company, the province of Saskatchewan, and the University of Saskatchewan. And they were acutely aware that we sit here in the middle of a major agriculture region in the world with a rich resource of research and innovation, as well as a tremendous prairie farming community. And they asked the question, how can this ecosystem better contribute to global food security? And they came up with a model of establishing the Global Institute for Food Security, and which operates as an institute at the university and with its own international board. And so the institute was established with the vision of seeking a world where everyone has access to safe and nutritious food, and one might add sufficient into that as well. But it's the mission which is the critical part, that this is, we work with partners, and partnership is so critical when we're tackling multi-scale and multidisciplinary problems. So we work with partners to discover, develop, and deliver. And the deliver element is important to us, delivering innovative solutions for production of globally sustainable food. So that's the background to GIFS, and with the name global, we're here to serve both Canada and to make a contribution around the world. And Bangladesh is the country that we've focused on. And just very quickly, by way of background, this is a very interesting and rapidly developing country, but one with many challenges. The map on the right here shows the elevations, and the red areas are areas below 10 meters above sea level, and much of the green is less than 30 meters above sea level. So that gives you an idea of its geographical context. The population is very large, and 164 million, set to grow to 230 million, one of the most densely populated countries in the world. And yet it's one that's been achieving tremendous growth. And that has led to middle income status. But there is, ongoing challenges, particularly from which impact on food security and still leave a significant residue of poverty. So what are the major food security challenges? Well, I've mentioned population, but on top of that, and the need to feed an extra 2 million mouths a year, Bangladesh is losing 1% per annum of its agricultural land to a combination of seawater incursion and salinity and urbanization. It also is in a zone where climate change is being felt very severely in many ways. It suffers both chronic flooding and drought at different seasons. And much work has been done over the years to help raise the productivity of agriculture. And one of these was through the use of groundwater. Rice is the predominant crop in Bangladesh, 70% of total output. But that introduced a new problem, and the map shows you on the right there the areas in which arsenic contamination has occurred as a result of overuse of groundwater groundwater. So that's a serious problem and needs to be addressed. Similarly, it's a country with 30 sort of agro-eco different zones, and the soils across the country are seriously depleted. The country manages to grow 3 or sometimes 4 crops per annum, but that depletion is a real threat to future production and food security. And on top of that, various levels of food loss occur depending on the crop. So the involvement of Bangladesh and Canada is underpinned by strong historical links going back to the 1971 when Bangladesh was first became a sovereign nation, and it was recognized by Canada very early on. Our two nations both have a large agricultural sector, ambitions to operate efficiently and effectively. In the case of Bangladesh, primarily to feed a rapidly growing population, but Canada primarily to export from the country. And so we have that commonality, and we also share the need to address the sustainable development goals, which and some of the challenges I've already alluded to in relation to food security, but climate, especially adaptation, ensuring gender equality takes place as the country continues to develop is critical too, and at the same time addressing poverty through these actions. And what Bangladesh has identified is needed is new technologies and skills in order to feed the population and sustain its economic growth. And with that comes a growth in trade opportunities. The country is already the 41st largest economy, and by 2035 it will be the world's 25th largest economy. And trade with Canada is growing extremely rapidly in both directions. So having identified Bangladesh as a country with which it would make sense to work, we initiated this partnership as a result of a visit by the Bangladesh High Commission. That led on to identifying areas in which we felt we could work together. And we had a very senior delegation visit from Bangladesh with people from the Ministry of Agriculture, from the research councils, from universities. And we had an intense period where we drafted areas of cooperation and a memorandum of understanding. And that was developed and further supported by ministerial input and meetings in both countries, which and this has been important throughout, governments working together to support us. We then went off to Bangladesh with a very large delegation from the campus, people from the Global Institute for Food Security, from the university, from the National Research Council and other organizations. And we worked out a detailed program focus and signed the MOU. And since then, we've been, during the COVID period, have been working to develop those programs in more detail and have secured initial funding to start the work. So the memorandum is focused very much on advanced knowledge and technologies for agricultural research in Bangladesh and the delivery of sustainable development goals. And that is going to be tackled through a combination of research, development, infrastructure investment, training and technology transfer, and various other measures such as a sponsored chair. So the focus of the structure of agricultural research in Bangladesh is heavily focused around the National Agricultural Research System and many institutes. And the key goal is to enhance the capabilities of that system, to introduce new technologies, to provide training, and through that ensure that we tap into the full talent pool in Bangladesh and give proper emphasis to gender equality in that process, whilst also thinking about data management and of course impact. And at the heart of this implementation plan is going to be the establishment of a new agricultural technology centre to coordinate all these efforts and to be co-guided by GIFS and other partners. And this is to be in the name of Bangabandhu, who was the leader and regarded as the father of the nation of Bangladesh, and the Canadian Prime Minister at the time, Elliot Trudeau. And the four themes listed at the bottom of this slide, we don't have time today to go into these in detail, but you can see there they relate back to some of the problems that I identified in terms of food security, and in all areas they bring opportunities for the application of new technologies and a step change in the approach and the productivity of the agricultural system, and to do so in a sustainable way, of course. And so in summary, we're tackling research capabilities. We're going to be having programs for human capital in each of those four areas. A strong focus on sustainable development goals and clearly zero hunger, no poverty, climate, partnership, gender. These are amongst those in the mainstream, but we touch on many in this program and within the plans that have been put in place for what will be a 10-year partnership. And so climate resilience and sustainability are critical to all elements, as is the focus on outcomes and recognizing that poor and marginal farmers and women, they must always be in our minds, and no one must be left behind. So just drawing to a close now, what are the sort of key features that we've tried to adopt in our approach? And I think first of all, it's to recognize that when you're trying to work with improving a system, you have to think not just about one aspect of sustainability, and perhaps that was a problem with the groundwater extraction some years ago. but to recognise we need to integrate economic, environmental and social sustainability in our thinking. We've been supported and empowered, I think, by being able to connect excellent science and research and innovation from Canada, from Saskatchewan, and with ourselves and our partners here, and to connect that into diplomatic support in the aid of sustainable development. And that is in due course is leading on already to some discussions about new trade opportunities on the back of this initiative. So the key feature though here, coordination of multidisciplinary skills across our ecosystem, is sort of coming back to the purpose, one of the key purposes of why the Global Institute for Food Security was established. It was, to help us catalyse the strengths and work in partnership with our friends and colleagues here and elsewhere in the world to really provide a focus on these problems and not to work in isolated areas. And so, in essence, we're talking about long-term partnership, and I was struck by Karina Gould's MP final comment as she concluded her presentation. We need a world where we look after each other, and I think the partnership that we've been putting together here is very much in that spirit. There is a kind of enlightened self-interest, through helping others, you help yourself, and so it's a virtuous circle of support in which we can prosper in a sustainable way. So that's the end of my slides, but I'm delighted to say that the support we've had from the Bangladesh High Commission in Ottawa and the staff there and the High Commissioner. And the High Commissioner has kindly provided a brief video which our technical staff will now play for you. Thank you very much.
Today's session chair, distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It's my pleasure to get connected virtually to the 4th annual People Around the World Conference. The friendly bilateral relationship between Bangladesh and Canada have been deeply rooted since our independence in 1971. The present government led by the Honorable Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina attaches great importance to Bangladesh-Canada bilateral relation and considers Canada not only as an important development partner for our early reconstruction and rehabilitation, but also as a key driver for transforming sustainable technology, research collaboration, increased trade investment, people-to-people contact for the betterment of the two countries. The present Bangladesh government has set its target to become a developed nation by 2041 to materialize the Sonar Bangla, we call Golden Bangla, as dreamt by the father of our nation, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. Bangladesh's stable economic growth over the last decade and its gradual integration into the global economy has made her a role model for economic development despite in the backward slide of the pandemic. Rapid expansion of industrial sector enabled us to double our annual export earnings in just 5 years. Solid growth in agriculture and reopening of the service sector have provided significant increase in GDP by nearly 6% and resilience to our economy even in the outbreak of COVID-19. I firmly believe the partnership between the Global Institute for Food Security and the Bangladesh Agricultural Research Council will be the cornerstone to achieve a safe, sustainable food strategy for the benefit of the people of our two friendly countries. The recent development on setting up Bangabandhu-Pierre Trudeau Agricultural Technology Center and materializing Bangabandhu Research Chair in GIFS by the name of our founding father of the nation, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, on the eve of his birth centennial and golden jubilee celebration of our independence, will add a new dimension under the purview of these two MOUs. Bangladesh is committed to implementing both the MOUs to increase mutual cooperation for trade, diversification, and investment promotion in the long run. We anticipate increased support from both the Department of International Development and Small Business Export Promotion and International Trade under the Global Affairs Canada. We also look forward to joint mobilization of funds for implementation of the MOUs. I'm confident that this endeavor will reach us a new height of further bilateral engagement in the era of multidisciplinary research, training, and skill development of the scientists, entrepreneurs to combat against the global climate change, eradicate hunger, empower women, ensure food security, and leveraging the benefits of scaling up the lives and livelihood of our marginal farmers to achieve the United Nations SDGs working hand in hand. I wish all the success of this World Conference, and thank you very much for having me in this congruent journey of global partnership. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Visscher, for an absolutely wonderful presentation that really put a spotlight on science and diplomacy in action, and how it is so important that we build strong social and environmental foundations upon which economic prosperity can occur. The next presentation is a collaborative one with my colleague, Dr. Jim Robson and Dr. Marlene Soriano. Jim is an assistant professor at the University of Saskatchewan School of Environment and Sustainability and the university's UNESCO Co-chair in Biocultural Diversity, Sustainability, Reconciliation, and Renewal. He is an environmental social scientist working with Indigenous and local communities in Latin America on natural resource and land management issues. He is building capacity to engage youth and bridge community practitioner scholar audiences. His work provided the foundation for a Bolivian community forestry youth engagement project supported by a USASC International Research Partnership Fund, in which Jim collaborates closely with the Bolivian Institute of Forest Research. Marlene is the program director for the integral development of social ecological projects at the Bolivian Institute of Forest Research. With a PhD in forest ecology and forest management, Marlene has focused her work around developing more inclusive and just business relations using multi-stakeholder platforms. Her work with the UNESCO chair is centered around building relations with partner communities in Bolivia, implementing project meetings, workshops, and outputs, and expanding opportunities for effective knowledge mobilization. Today, Jim and Marlene will present Exploring the Role of Youth in Community-Based Resource Management and Conservation. Welcome, Jim and Marlene.
Thank you ever so much, Irina, for that introduction, and it's wonderful to be here. Hope everyone is doing well. So we've got a really good turnout, which is very nice to see. So I'm just going to share my screen. Yeah, we're delighted to be here, and I'm obviously delighted that Marlene can join me today to talk about some of the work that we've been doing for the past few years in Latin America, including Bolivia. I'm joining you from Saskatoon, but Marlene is joining us from the city of Santa Cruz in eastern Bolivia. And I'm sure she'll introduce herself in a little bit when we get to her part of the presentation. So we're going to be talking about this question of youth engagement in community-based territorial governance. And so I think about Stephen's presentation, we're now bringing it very much to sort of the grassroots community level. And if I think about the theme of the session, we're probably more focused around this question of land security and sovereignty, and the tie-in with governance and autonomy in governance. So I'm just going to give you a quick outline of what we'll cover. I'll provide some context to hopefully give you an idea of the relevance and the importance of the work. talk a little bit about the work we've done so far and its tie-in with the SDGs. And then Marlene is going to talk about her case study work in Bolivia, working with a particular indigenous territory close to Santa Cruz. And then we'll look at some key lessons from both the Bolivian work and the other work we've been doing with youth in Latin America and other global regions. And then we wanted to talk a little bit about, or at least mention, about how this work is panning out and has been impacted by COVID-19, both from our perspective as researchers, but also from a community perspective. So I've put this slide up here just to kind of give a visual aid and to really focus our minds on the kinds of places where Marlene and I have been working. So we are working in areas where people have strong connections with the land, with the natural environment, places where indigenous and local communities have customary lands, customary territories, which in many cases they hold rights to. And this map is just to give a visual representation of the importance of these kinds of places and the extent, the global extent of these kinds of places. So the top map actually is showing biodiversity hotspots around the world, and the bottom map is showing linguistic diversity, which is is used as a proxy for cultural diversity. And if you imagine those two maps laying over one another, you'll see there's quite a high degree of overlap. And so we're working in these kinds of regions. And if we think about biodiversity conservation, environmental governance, land management, the people living in communities, in rural and remote communities in these kinds of regions, are playing a really important role in environmental stewardship. Whether we're thinking about their contributions to local environments and sustainable livelihoods, but also to regionally important ecosystem services, and of course, global commons such as biodiversity and climate change. So that's given you an idea of where we're working and who we're working with, communities in those kinds of places. And one of the questions that we've been exploring in recent years is the role of youth in all of this, and why youth engagement and youth involvement might be important for the future. And so I guess there's two parts to this in terms of the relevance and the value and the importance of it. One is coming from the communities themselves who we're partnering with. So Marlene and myself have many years now of experience working in these kinds of regions, and we have a network of collaborators with whom we've worked who also work with these kinds of communities. And one of the things that's clear is that communities are looking for strategies and policies to secure a bright and vibrant, sustainable future for themselves. And given that these are places where collective labour, energy and ideas really do shape village life and territorial governance, the choices that youth make in these places is definitely an important part of that puzzle. So for communities, youth engagement is becoming really important. And as applied researchers, there's not a great deal known about youth engagement in environmental governance in these kinds of settings. And so the question of who will make up the next generation of land managers in these places that are so important from an environmental sustainability perspective is an important one. And we want to find out what youth are thinking, what they're interested in and what they're planning to do with their futures, and to what degree does the community and the territory fit into all of that. So since 2017, Marlene and myself have been collaborating along with others to look at this. And so we were involved in a project called The Future of Forest Work and Communities, which was designed to sort of provide a snapshot of what might be going on. And so we organised and held visioning workshops with youth, with 200 youth in around 14 communities across 9 countries, and that was not just in the Americas but also in Africa and Asia. And then did some synthesis work to look at some of the commonalities, differences, and future research needs. So that kind of kick-started things for us and gave us a good sort of initial idea of what might be happening. And so since then, from about 2019 onwards, we've been doing a bit more in-depth work. And so that sort of involves student thesis research. And so that's been happening in Mexico and Bolivia, in person, and obviously now remote work. But we've also been looking to support community youth engagement initiatives. So where communities are looking for support or are interested in doing certain things, we've tried to find ways to support that. And that's extended also to funding some youth-led pilot projects in a number of countries, including Mexico and Bolivia. And there's just some imagery, some photos from some of the work and activities carried out to date. So just a sort of a tie-in here with the SDGs. It's often critical to a lot of the work that we're doing here at the university is around sustainability, is using the SDGs as really as a guiding framework and an anchor for a lot of the things that we're interested in exploring. And I think the work around youth actually touches on several. And when you start looking at the targets and indicators, we've just highlighted the 5 here, or five SDGs that our work really does touch on. I won't go into detail on that, but it's just a reminder of where our work ties in with the Sustainable Development Goals. So I think I'm going to hand over now to Marlene, who's going to talk about some of the work that IBIF is doing with an indigenous territory in Bolivia, just to give you a sense of some of the current work that's happening. And Marlene, I can move the slides along as you just let me know, okay?
Thank you. Thank you, Jim. Good afternoon to everyone. I am Marlene Soriano. I work for the Bolivian Institute for Forestry Research. Thank you for the nice introduction. And yeah, I want to tell you about research and also development interventions that we are doing in Bolivia. With my institution. We have been working also in collaboration, or at least working within a large framework of a large project that we had, which is the Green Livelihood Alliance, that is supported by the Dutch government. And in that regards also, we have seen a collaborative yeah, so we saw a lot of like the global objectives of this project has a lot to do with this work that we have been engaging with Jim and the University of Saskatchewan, which is about youth engagement in indigenous territorial governance. Can you please go one slide? Thank you. So we have worked with the Lomerío Indigenous Territory, which is nominated as Moncosh Nation. It is located in eastern Bolivia at 290 kilometers away from one of Bolivia's largest cities, which is Santa Cruz de la Sierra. Lomerío is and has been promoting youth participation in territorial governance already for some quite years. And one of these ways of promoting is by encouraging member communities to get young professionals in community leadership roles. And that comes from a realization that good governance means also inclusive governance, a practice that is intrinsic to Monkosh traditions, which is also in their decision-making processes very much bounded to that. Here we have a picture of from ones that Jim visited us. Also, we went to Lomerío, and here we are with the local authorities or territorial authorities who are the caciques. Please, Jim. Okay. So in 2017, we engaged also youth through these visioning workshops that Jim already mentioned before. And from these workshops, we generated reports for the SICOL, which is the organization that is the administrative organization of the territory. So they have requested, based on that information, they have requested support to develop an effective youth engagement strategy in response to concerns and opportunities that came out from these youth visioning workshops. And also, like Lomerío, like for already more than a decade, and their population has not been increasing, but rather going a little bit down. So that is one of the main concerns of SICOL. And also that they found that the majority of youth wish to return to their communities after being away. And I mean, if there is high out-migration of youth, they wish to return to their communities at a later time in their lives. And that is something unique that compared to other communities, more recently established communities that we also had the opportunity to work with here in Bolivia. These indigenous communities, the indigenous youth want to return. And that may be also related to the bonds that they have with their culture, with their families, and also with nature. So that means that youth are interested in issues that affect also their livelihoods and also their environment. Please. So with that in mind, we have worked in this proposal that we got granted, and so which aims to identify opportunities and delineate strategies with SICOL and youth together. So for that, we have hired a local assistant and from Lomerío, who has been suggested by the SICOL. And so together with SICOL, we have worked in the content of these focus group works to work with youth that are not only representatives of few communities, but from the 4 zones of Lomerío. In total, we carried out 2 focal group works with youth. In total, we had 28 participants, and a 3rd focal group is planned because some youth from some communities couldn't participate at that time. Please. And another focus group work that we had was with SICOL, and with a high participation of the caciques and also from the Elders Council and technicians that support SICOL at this time. Please. So from what we did is to reflect on different aspects of communities' life and also at the territorial level, together with SICOL and also with the youth. So we reflected on livelihoods and on inclusion and governance issues. And also had the opportunity to analyze and to identify what opportunities youth and SICOL see for youth to increase youth participation and engagement. We did a further analysis and also identified strategic allies and strategies for results to work later in a work plan to have a more long-term implementation. So the graph here is a little bit smaller, but this is one graph from the results, like the one in blue is what SICOL perceives as what their participation is in the territory. As you can see in one of the corners, it says participation in decision making, like SICOL has a high participation, but the youth, these other three lines here are for the youth, girls, boys, and youth in general. So there are these differences, and also next, please, Jean. Okay, this is quite smaller. It has changed, I think. So, yeah. So in general, we wanted to see what is if there are any differences in what SICOL perceives as participation and what their perceptions are in how they are governing the territory, and also youth have their own perceptions, and we wanted to see what how they perceive also those issues, such as that both understand and come up with these solutions to increase their youth participation in territorial governance. So right now, what's next, and something that is ongoing, is that one of master students from SENS, Paula Sarigumba, is carrying out remote interviews to better understand youth health perspectives and realities, with these two main objectives. First, to investigate how boys and girls differ in their experiences and perceptions with regard to territorial governance, to identify and explore barriers and opportunities for boys and girls participation. As I mentioned before, we will have soon, very soon, an overall workshop, like a general workshop, where SICOL and youth representatives will come up with a work plan for the following 5 years and have that approved. And yeah, that's next. Thank you.
If we're out of time, Irina, it can be the end. Yes.
I'm sure you'll have some questions in the Q&A. Thank you so much for keeping on time. We know that sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So thank you, Dr. Robson and Soriano, for presenting such a compelling narrative about why and how youth must be involved so they have a voice in determining what that future will be. Our final presentation on the Food, Land, Water session is 3 initiatives to promote equitable sustainability and share successes from my USask colleague, Dr. Corinne Schuster-Wallace. Corinne focuses on coupled systemed approaches to water health challenges, including environmental change impacts and the linkages between local water security and well-being in rural, remote, and marginalized communities. In addition to being an associate professor of geography and planning at USask's College of Arts and Science, Corinne is the associate director of Global Water Futures, a University of Saskatchewan-led research program that aims to deliver risk management solutions to manage water futures in Canada and other cold regions of the world, where global warming is changing landscapes, ecosystems, and the water environment. It is my pleasure to now welcome Corinne.
Thank you very much, Irina. Hello, everyone. I'm joining you today from Saskatoon, Treaty 6 territory and homeland of the Métis. And as Irina introduced, I'd like to just introduce you to 3 relatively new initiatives around equitable sustainable development and to support equitable sustainable development. Global Water Futures, as mentioned, is a Canadian First Research Excellence Fund grant that is hosted by the University of Saskatchewan and the Global Institute for Water Security in partnership with the University of Waterloo, McMaster University, and Wilfrid Laurier University. I'm also going to put on a hat where I co-chair the working group on climate change and health for the Canadian Coalition for Global Health Research. We all know that one of the key messages behind the Sustainable Development Goals is leaving no one behind. And as COVID-19 has underscored, and as many of the presenters to this point today have said, that we have a long way to go to achieve this in reality. And this means that we have an obligation to consider equity, diversity, and inclusion, not only in our institutions, but also in our research and our research impacts. And Global Water Futures and the Global Institute for Water Security are pushing this ahead through the retention of Dr. Andrea Rowe, who is an equity, diversity, and inclusion specialist. And we have been working on a GWF EDI strategy that's forthcoming in the next couple of weeks. It'll be open for consultation within Global Water Futures. And it is premised on the institution. So in terms of us being able to work together, research in terms of our global impact, and knowledge mobilization in terms of our partnerships. And we are looking at these 3 pillars through the lenses of people, the education and training that's required, the operations of what we need to do, and then the practice of how we do those. And I want to focus really on the research element of it, because I don't believe that people pay enough attention to equity, diversity, and inclusion in research, and particularly in water research, because all of us have multiple intersecting identities. And some of these identities confer power and privilege, and others represent disempowerment and oppression. And collectively, these shape how we interact with and we value water. And because water is life, we all have to interact with water in some way, shape, or form. And water resources, infrastructure, and therefore access are not equitably distributed around the world. They're not distributed over space, and they're not distributed over time. And climate change is exacerbating this. The threats posed by water through floods, droughts, and the subsequent landslides don't affect everyone equally, and the solutions don't benefit everyone equally. And so when we're thinking about the research that we undertake, we need to think about the intersecting identities, the low and middle income countries versus high income countries, urban versus rural, ability, age, sex and gender, a socioeconomic status, our culture. And we need to think about those in the context of water availability, quality and quantity, yes, but also infrastructure, the accessibility, how we access ecosystem services, how we use them, how we value them, the people who are employed in the water sector, and also how we manage and govern our water, especially across boundaries, whether that's inside countries or international boundaries. And the reason that I say this is that I believe we have an obligation as researchers, and our obligations are to constantly ask ourselves, what is the research question? Who is posing the research question? Who are we undertaking the research for? How are we collecting the data? Are we collecting data from particular groups of people? Are we hearing all of the voices that need to be heard? who is deciding what data are being collected, where and when? And what is the purpose? Why are we doing this? And who is deciding what happens? And this becomes fundamental in terms of we need to move into an area where we are co-creating research, particularly with communities. And communities are defined very broadly. It could be a community of planners. It could be a First Nation community. It could be a remote community in sub-Saharan Africa. But we need to consider the diverse voices in data collection and consider the vulnerable populations, both in our analyses, but also in our recommendations, and ensure that our research is helping to address equity, diversity, and inclusion, but also, more importantly, isn't continuing the systemic barriers that may exist. And so that includes consideration of not only the impacts, but the impacts of the messages, and also who needs to hear them, and whether they are being mobilized in a way that the people who need to hear them, the people that the messages help, are actually able to access that information and knowledge. The second initiative is referring to sharing success and failure. And the reason that I've put both here is because we learn from our failures, but our successes can help others to succeed. And we are behind on achieving the SDG targets, particularly the water-related SDG targets. And again, like the rest of the Sustainable Development Agenda, this is compounded by the COVID-19 pandemic. But the UN has agreed to an International Decade for Action on Water for Sustainable Development to accelerate particularly Sustainable Development Goal 6, the water goal, but also the other water-related targets. And they are aiming to accelerate, share, and inspire others to do the same through the sharing of knowledge, through the sharing of programs and tools and information. Employment and Social Development Canada's action plan for the Sustainable Development Goals also refers to sharing best practices and highlighting stories on action. And so we have developed a website to kickstart the Water Action Decade in Canada. And it's canadawaterdecade.net. And it's a place where people can learn, share, and act. And so we have provided opportunities for people to upload resources, to upload advocacy materials, but more importantly, to upload their stories, to share their successes, but also to provide opportunities to share the challenges that they overcame in creating those successes. And here you see an example of one of the stories that has been placed on the website, and it's Collaborative Leadership Initiative out of Southern Manitoba. And it brings together the leaders, the traditional leaders and elders with the elected officials and political officials who are collaborating to improve sustainability in the Lake Winnipeg Basin, and to do this on the three pillars of economic growth, environmental integrity, and social development. The third initiative that I'd like to share with you is being undertaken by, as I said, the Canadian Coalition for Global Health Research. And it's focused on One Planet Living at universities. And so One Planet Living is maintaining a footprint that is equal to the planetary resources that we use. And so making sure that we don't overshoot the resources that we're using in our everyday lives. And so it's focused on health and happiness, equity and local economy, the culture, sustainable water, land use, sustainable food, materials, transport, and also zero waste and zero carbon, all elements that have already been introduced by Irina through the USask Sustainability Plan. And it talks about universities and looks at universities as communities in and of themselves, but also universities as part of communities. And that's where the University of Saskatchewan and Saskatoon Memorandum of Understanding become really critical in terms of looking towards sustainable development, and particularly the roles that universities can play in sustainable development. And so this initiative will be mapping, measuring, and mobilizing universities, mapping sustainability initiatives and programs both institutional education, but also research, and providing a compendium, again, of knowledge where people and universities can share their promising practices, what worked, what didn't, and other universities can look to what universities are doing in terms of promoting sustainable development, but also living sustainable development and acting on sustainable development. And so the second element is actually to measure university footprints and to work with eco-cities out of British Columbia to build on the app that they already have for individuals and for communities, and to adapt that app to university settings. And finally, mobilize. And that's mobilizing to strengthen action plans and operational active initiatives. And this is all about addressing sustainability, but also the determinants of health, equity, inclusion, diversity, and climate change adaptation. And so with that, I'll say thank you very much. And if you'd like to learn anything more about any of these initiatives, feel free to contact me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Schuster-Wallace, for explaining why as scholars we need to be doubly engaged, not only in our own disciplines where we have expertise and experience, but with the public, and to mobilize knowledge both from the university to the public, but as importantly to the public back to the university. We're now going to start the Q&A session, and I just want to remind you of the chat function that will be open. Please put your questions in the chat and use the everyone as the recipient so that we could all track it. But also, if you don't want to ask a question, but just have a comment or a thought that you would like to share, we would love to hear from that too. As the questions come in, I'd like to kick it off with a question to Jim and Marlene. Have you identified key incentives that might motivate youth now or in the future to stay in their rural communities rather than migrate to urban centers in search of economic opportunities? And related to this, has the COVID-19 pandemic affected youth perceptions of these urban centers?
Yeah, thanks for that question. It's an important question because that's what we're trying to get at, right? We're trying to figure out what those incentives would be. I think what we have learned is that, and this is not just in Bolivia, but other places where we've worked, is youth have a strong connection to their communities. Whether they migrate away or not, they have a strong connection. They're interested in getting involved. But one of the things that might be holding them back is that in many cases, they aren't necessarily empowered to get involved when they're that kind of age. And there seems to be a barrier there, whether that's cultural or something else. But certainly the sort of feedback we got from youth is that if opportunities were created for them, if they were brought in more into the fold, they would respond positively to that. I think on the COVID-19 side of things, I think we can all, imagine that COVID-19 has made us reflect about things. It's made us reflect about our life, about home. And that's no different from youth in those communities. A lot of youth are back in their communities. They've gone back, or they've got stuck in their communities because they've not been able to leave. And I think that experience, no doubt, going to be shaping their plans. And it may force them to look inward a little bit and connect even more with their community, or think about their community in a different way because of that experience. And I think that's something that we're going to be looking at moving forward.
Thank you for that, Jim. There's so much more I'd like to learn from you, and we can pick it up afterwards with many of the Indigenous youth that I'm working with in the North. But now I'd like to pose a question for Stephen Visscher. And as Dr. Schuster-Wallace described the importance of EDI, equity, diversity, inclusion, we know that diversity is an accelerator for discovery and innovation. What steps has your team taken to ensure that diversity, inclusion, and equity are present in the Canada-Bangladesh initiative that you presented earlier?
Well, thank you. Yes, an important question. And we tackled it at different levels. At the very beginning, when we were talking about, well, what are the priorities, we were keen to understand from the Bangladesh government representatives and research council representatives where this issue figured in their list of priorities. And so we asked the open question, you know, how important is this to you? And it became clear that that their views on this are very similar to ours and the policy position from Canada. Of course, they in Bangladesh recognise that they have a huge talent pool and many opportunities, and if they are to realise the full benefits for their economy and social improvement and health and well-being, then it would be clearly foolhardy to omit a key part of the population. And so at the one level, we got that assurance that it was important to them. And so then as we started to look at the programs, and I didn't talk in any detail about the programs, but within each of them, particularly around the themes of new technologies, we are going to make sure that as we introduce new technologies, that there is equality there and equal opportunity. And when it comes to recruiting people and encouraging people to move between our two countries, that we're always looking at that balance issue, so that, you know, culturally it becomes built into our thinking for the overall initiative, whichever program you're in. And an important theme as well is, whilst we have 4 programs, they all overlap with each other because everything is connected ultimately. And so, you know, we will also be, you know, promoting that aspect and encouraging people to work across the disciplines into and cross the boundaries, so to speak. And that applies equally to women as to men. So we're at the early stages in this. We're also talking, of course, with I didn't have time really to talk about funding and so on, but we have initial funding, and this will be part of that. But as we develop a more substantive funding package with the support from people like the High Commissioner and talking to NGOs around the world, we know that this will be a component of that. And so that's in summary how we're trying to make it mainstream within the program, and not just get more production out of traditional ways, but to draw on the full range of assets that are available in Bangladesh.
Thank you so much, Steve. And I hope that you're inspired by the presentation from Jim and Marlene about the importance of youth in some of the Canada-Bangladesh initiative as well, since they are such a valuable asset as well.
Indeed.
I'm turning the next question over to my friend and colleague, Corinne. Much of what you spoke about, you know, part of being in a university speaks to the power and privilege that we have to be able to study these questions. And the Global Water Futures Program in and of itself, which you're the associate director of, is very well funded. Yet communities that partner with you benefit from the shared advancement in knowledge. But many of these communities do not have long-term access to the resources, such as those that are brought by the Global Water Futures, to maintain the actions going forward. And I know that you will have thought about this, Corinne, but I'd love to hear from you. How can we overcome this dilemma of being able to continue in the equity, diversity, and inclusion of communities and shared knowledges once funding of major research projects come to an end?
It's a very loaded question, because in some ways it speaks to the funding mechanisms that we have, because there are issues in terms of engaging with communities to co-create research which is based on the needs of those communities, and then you only have a 20% chance of getting funded through perhaps some of the large tri-council funding opportunities. And so there's a disconnect between the co-creation of knowledge and the engagement with communities and the funding of research. And that's one challenge, and that's where Global Water Futures, in some ways, these large networks formal research networks are able to, with these large amounts of money, and we heard from the NIA grants earlier as well, are able to, at least over a long period of time, 7 years, 14 years, engage in those relationships. In terms of maintaining afterwards, there are now more and more community-based grants. And so one of the roles that I and others take on is supporting and helping to write some of those grants for the communities so that they are then able to obtain the funds themselves. And so the federal government, Environment Climate Change Canada in particular, has done a lot around community climate change research grants and opportunities. So it becomes a bit of a patchwork, but the reality is that it's built on partnerships and relationships. And if those are built in the right way on respect, reconciliation in the context of Indigenous communities, and the 5 E's of citizenship that we heard earlier, then really they will stand the test of time, and it becomes a reciprocal relationship. And in some ways, for some things, you don't need a whole lot of money. I mean, money always makes it easier, but particularly once communities have their own capacity, their own research capacity, and that's another element of it, is engaging the research team in my projects. It's community members, there will be youth researchers, and then those youth researchers are able to collect other data that the community wants. And again, the price tag goes down in those contexts. So there are lots of ways of working. The system doesn't necessarily fully support it, but having said that, there are other ways of engaging, and I'm sure that Jim and others have seen that in the work that they do and with the different communities and engaging the youth. And so there are always opportunities to enhance capacity and to build equity, diversion, and inclusion into research.
Thank you so much for that very thoughtful answer. I expressed it partly due to my own frustration of disconnects between things like tri-agency funding, who want to engage more with communities, and yet the time that it takes to build these authentic relationships, there's no resources to do that or thereafter. But you're right, we are creative and innovative, and we can do a lot with a little money, but it would go a long way if we had that type of support. Maybe we should become advocates for that, and we can talk about that again later. My next question is going to go back, and it kind of ties in to all three of you, but I specifically want to ask this of Jim and Marlene. And in many societies, we give reference to elders, and the youth are expected to learn from them and follow their lead. Yet youth are incredible resource for the SDGs and moving forward. My question to you is, have you found any difficulties in giving voice to the youth while still respecting some of these established hierarchies?
Marlene, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah. That's something also part of many cultures in which youth feel still shy about speaking out, especially in meetings that are usually the participants are the adults, and the ones who, like the later voice, like the voice that is most heard is from the elders. Right, that's somehow the culture in Lomerío. At the same time, like seeing the changes that have brought like this high migration and desires to better education and also more work or opportunities for work. The local authorities in Lomerío, they have found very important that youth are also engaged, because otherwise they will lose their main, the most I mean, most of the energy, you know, that can stay in the communities, and also hearing their ideas, their vision, I think has been very important, especially since we have started doing these visioning workshops. Often the cacique general, for example, when he is interviewed, he knows, and he also says that those results that the youth want to return to their communities is a message that the youth have given to them, that they need to be more inclusive in their governance, and also in managing the territory's natural resources, and for a better environment and economic also growth. So that would be more my answer. And that realization comes also from also among the elders. They love sharing their knowledge and share that with the youth. Recently, there was this exchange of knowledge. I mean, this transfer of knowledge from the elders to the youth with a different project, and that was also very enriching for the youth.
Thank you so much, Marlene. That was so interesting to learn how similar some of the issues you have in your country are to our own. I really appreciated that. This question goes out to everyone on the panel, and it is related to the fact that we have entered the digital revolution, and we've went from the industrial one to the digital age. And I wondered how the digital technology can influence the work that you are doing. And I'll start with asking Steve to lead it, but invite Jim, Marlene, as well as Corinne to also offer that. So give a specific example of how digital technology can support the work that you are doing.
So yeah, this is an important area because digital technologies, offer the opportunity to make some real changes. I think in Bangladesh, they have made excellent progress in terms of incremental change in their productivity, but it's not going to be enough, and they recognise that they need new technologies. And one of these is the application of genomics for plant breeding, and to link into that phenomic, the ability to image and interpret the plants at different stages of development. And so, to give you one specific example, and it sort of links back to the sort of broader sustainability agenda and biodiversity and agrobiodiversity, we know around the world that there is a huge amount of inherited biodiversity locked up in seed banks and stores that is not really used to the full extent. We often don't know what we've got. But the revolution in genomics has enabled us to apply techniques that can liberate that and provide new target for the plant breeders and enable them to get to more specific and more targeted and faster solutions than hitherto. And so because at the Global Institute for Food Security we have an omics and precision agriculture platform which we operate with on behalf of partners in the universities, the National Research Council and Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. We have a resource and capability there which is of a very high class, and we wish to use it both to help address Bangladesh problems, but also as a basis for providing training and exchange of people. And so coupled with that, there will also be a considerable attention to data management, because if you think about trying to tackle diversity across a wide range of different seeds and backgrounds, you get enormous data sets. And then you can think of many other ways in which you can characterize those seeds. I won't go further than that, but data management as well is going to be critical to this, and that's in our thinking, and it's in the specific programs that we've discussed with Bangladesh. And I should add that our partners in the university in computer science, as well as members of the Plant Imaging and Phenomics Centre. They are also heavily engaged with this.
Thank you, Steve. I'm just going to, we only have a minute left, and if Jim or Marlene or Corinne would just like to add a brief comment, I'd welcome that. Otherwise, we'll have to wrap it up.
Yes, please. I'd just like to say citizen science, disaggregated data, and then the CanadaWaterDecade.net. We wouldn't have these knowledge repositories. We wouldn't be able to share community experiences, youth experiences, institutional experiences, and success stories if we didn't have these technologies. And so that really is the success, to be able to share, and again, for others to be able to build on those successes and opportunities. Jim.
Yeah, if I may very quickly, COVID-19 impacted how students do research. Certainly my students who are doing community-based research, they can't do field work with communities right now. I have a student doing work in Mexico who is using Twitter, Instagram, social media to connect with youth in Oaxaca, and it's opened up a new line of inquiry for her. It's been a positive, let's say, from not being able to go in person and do her research.
That's fantastic. Between citizen science and individual science in the digital age, we have much to discover, and it's a pretty exciting future. I just want to wrap up this session by thanking each and every one of these wonderful panel members. It's been an honor to be your moderator. For Zachary, who asked about how to engage the youth to engage in the university sustainability strategy, I think it's easy to access. We are counting on the youth to become involved. I encourage you, whether you're a graduate student or an undergraduate student, to reach your student associations. They're your portal to entry, and there is a lot of exciting initiatives that are coming up that will involve the entire campus response. So if you need any more, just reach out to me directly, Zachary, and any other student who may be interested. And now it's my absolute pleasure to pass it back to our wonderful host, Meghna, to take us to the next part of the program. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Irina, and thank you to the food, land, and water session presenters.